When I was 19, at this point, I was still an organizer. I hadn't witnessed any gun violence firsthand. I've always heard it, always somehow missed it, thank God. And when I was 19 years old, I was at Newport Mall in Jersey City, a place where all my friends and I used to go in high school, and it was our first semester out of college. And we decided to meet up for winter break, and not even 10 feet away from me, there was a shooting, right? The shooter, I saw him take out the weapon, I saw him point it, I saw him shoot. And one of my friends froze, and by the second shot, that's kind of when I was like, we have to run. So, living with that afterwards, I still don't think I fully processed what happened.
Welcome to Pod Talks. Pod Talks is a project of protecting our democracy, where we bring together the best minds in New Jersey and beyond to talk about some of the biggest challenges facing our democracy, institutions, and personal freedoms. I'm Sean Spiller, Chair of Protecting Our Democracy. Today, I'm honored to have a powerful panel of guests who each in their own right brings so much expertise on the topic today, one that I know affects so many of us in so many ways, gun violence, and the work to reduce gun violence in our democracy. So let me start with some brief introductions. Jai Patel is a Jersey City native that specializes in inner city organizing with a focus on gun violence prevention, community relations, and victim advocacy. He recently graduated from Rutgers University with a BA in criminal justice and political health policy. Throughout his high school and college, he has held leadership positions with reputable gun violence prevention organizations like Everytown for Gun Safety, the Brady Campaign, and March for Our Lives. He's committed to implementing data-driven strategies to end gun violence in New Jersey and to improve the quality of life for future generations. Dr. Liza Chowdhury is a scholar activist whose experience includes working in community corrections and teaching in higher education. In 2017, Dr. Chowdhury co-founded the nonprofit Reimagining Justice to reimagine the justice system that provides love, empathy, equality, and opportunities for our communities. The organization has partnered across the United States and internationally to provide transformative mentoring, narrative therapy, resilience circles, training, support, and consulting services. In 2020, Reimagining Justice partnered in collaborations with St. Joe's University Medical Center to receive $1 million grant from the Office of the New Jersey Attorney General to implement the very first hospital-based violence intervention prevention in Passaic County, Patterson Healing Collective, PHC. Since the creation of PHC, the program has served about 180 victims of gun violence. Jasmine Surti has been a volunteer with Moms Demand Action for Gun Sense in America since 2017. Moms Demand Action's mission is to call attention to the epidemic of gun violence in our community, to uplift the voices and experiences of gun violence survivors, and to advocate for policies, laws, and programs that prevent gun violence, death, and injuries. Jasmine's current role is to lead the local volunteer efforts and events to help make sure that everyone who wants to join the movement can find opportunities to take action that work for them. Aside from her volunteer leadership role, Jasmine has a full-time job in banking and lives with her husband and two teenage daughters in Lawrenceville, New Jersey. And finally, we're honored to have Lakeesha Eure, born and raised in the City of Newark and trained professionally as a licensed social worker. She has over 20 years of social work experience working with at-risk populations of youth and adults who are in the justice system and social welfare system. Lakeesha is the former chairwoman of the Newark Anti-Violence Coalition, and currently Lakeesha serves as the first director of the Office of Violence Prevention and Trauma Recovery for the City of Newark, where she's developing strategies to implement public health and community-based public safety initiatives continue to decrease crime and violence in the City of Newark. In addition to this work, Lakeesha is founder of the Beta Kappa Sigma Black and Latina Sorority Incorporated to teach young women about culture, achievement, and excellence. And with that, let me thank all of you for being part of this conversation. I'm certainly looking forward to the discussion on what I think is a hard topic for everyone with its impact. The news of gun violence, and when we read about it, it seems daily here, it has a huge impact on our lives. To date, there's been at least 279 reported mass shootings in 2023 already. And when you think about how many days we are into the year, that is just so overwhelming and powerful a number. We know that there are more guns in the hands of people in this country than there are people. I think that says a lot as well. And tragically, gun violence is the leading cause of death in our youth. And it's really hard to imagine how any democracy can thrive in these circumstances. But I guess if there's some silver lining or some a bright spot, it's knowing that each of you represent in your own way really important work going on to reduce gun violence. So we have a reason to be optimistic. So I think that's a great place to start, in maybe understanding how gun violence impacts our communities and our lives, and maybe how gun violence impacted you personally and each of our communities. Um, let me start. John, maybe I'll start with you on this. Growing up in the movement, I think I'd say that about you. What caused you to first get involved, and what has changed since you first got involved?
Yeah, Shauna, well, thank you so much for having me. What really spurred me to action, I think, like a lot of young people in America at the time, was on February 14th, 2018. MSD was unfortunately, the community in Parkland, Florida, was unfortunately, a victim to one of the most heinous school shootings in this country's history, which is a crazy sentence to say out loud. And so that really spurred me being from Jersey City. Gun violence is unfortunately the backdrop of our childhood, right? You hear about it. Fortunately, I, as a child, I was fortunate enough not to, become a survivor or witness any kind of gun violence until I was about 19 years old. What really spurred me to action was what was going down in my city at the time. 2018 was a pretty bad year gun violence wise for Jersey City, and what was going on across the country. Being where I grew up, there wasn't really an emphasis on the power and the voices of young people. So seeing that, across the country, all these young people were coming together, and we were really at the front lines of this movement for change was really important. The impact it has on all of us is very sometimes you don't realize it. There's a lot of my friends who have PTSD. A lot of my friends have lost family members, community members, things of that nature. When I was 19, at this point, I was still an organizer. I hadn't witnessed any gun violence firsthand. I've always heard it, always somehow missed it, thank God. And when I was 19 years old, I was at Newport Mall in Jersey City, a place where all my friends and I used to go in high school, and it was our first semester out of college. And we decided to meet up for winter break, and not even 10 feet away from me, there was a shooting, right? The shooter, I saw him take out the weapon, I saw him point it, I saw him shoot. And one of my friends froze, and by the second shot, that's kind of when I was like, we have to run. So, living with that afterwards, I still don't think I fully processed what happened to me. I'm not sure how many of my friends did. I was fortunate enough to, as a young person with Every Time for Gun Safety with Student Span Action, I was fortunate enough to have access to therapy and things of that nature that could help me process this as a young person. But there are a lot of folks growing up, black and brown folks, who don't have that opportunity, where it's become super normalized at such a young age, gun violence, because there is no investment in the community on any political or judicial level until unfortunately, something terrible happens in the neighborhood that looks familiar to where legislators and folks like that live at, right? Or the victims of that crime look like their own children, and that's kind of when people get spurred to action. So growing up in America has definitely been, I'm fortunate, but also it's ridiculous that it's the leading cause of death for young people. Especially in such a quote unquote developed country that we are. It really is important how we treat our children and future generations. And at this point, I unfortunately do not think that there is enough of an investment on a national scale, even past conversation, in our children and the safety of future American generations.
Well, I got to tell you, what's just so powerful listening to you speak there is when you say, I was so fortunate as a youth, wasn't affected until I was 19. I mean, that just is striking, because that is, as we know, still such a young age. And, if that's how we're measuring things, I think it speaks to exactly what you're saying and the need for us to take action. Dr. Chowdhury, maybe I'd go to you and ask what have you seen in terms of the impact on gun violence, and certainly Director Eure, I'll go to you as well. When we talk about Patterson, when we talk about Newark, respectively, we know there's a lot of trauma. We know the resources and communities. How has it been personal for you and in the work you're doing?
For me, it's been very personal. I started off working my career as a juvenile probation officer, and I think towards the end of my career, around 2014, 13, there was just this uptick in Patterson in violence, where I was working with youth for say a year or two, and I was used to them coming to the office, and all of a sudden those chairs were empty because they lost their lives to violence. So this is how I got introduced to the work. Once I finished my tenure at probation, I decided to get my PhD and still work with community activist groups that are centered around anti-violence, and still engaging youth that I worked with when I was at probation. When I started working with youth and throughout the state of New Jersey, actually came into contact with Director Eure when she had the Newark Anti-Violence Coalition, and then other groups like Newark Community Street Team and other groups in New York too that were doing what's called community-based violence intervention work. And I saw the impact and the power of it, especially when you put resources and sustainability behind it. So that's how I reached out to the local hospital when this RFP for HVIP came out, and asked if we could partner and if I could bring together some of the community activists that I already know centered their work around anti-violence, and we all partnered together to come under this umbrella called the Patterson Healing Collective. And the way that impacts me directly still to this day, because of my tenure in Patterson, I've worked there for so many years. These young people that saw them grow up, to see them now being harmed by gun violence is very impactful to me, because when I arrive at the bedside, seeing them in those moments where they're fighting between life or death, you know what I mean? It's just it's traumatic, right? Traumatic not just for me, traumatic for their families, traumatic for them, traumatic for our team. We've interacted where there's been mass in our communities. They don't always call it mass shootings, but we've even had some of our actual workers. We had one young man that we hired in April. He was shot in a mass shooting in May, and we had to arrive at that bedside just to make sure he was okay and offer him services and do everything that we do for the rest of our clients. So it doesn't just impact us from the outside, it impacts us directly. About half of our employees are survivors of violence. Many of our recent outreach workers that we hired, they were actually impacted by violence for the last 2 years, went through our program, and now are full-time employees so that they could be a part of the peace talks. So this is something very close to us. We don't take it lightly at all. We have this. We just want to stop violence. That's it. You know what I mean? I know that for some people that just seems like something that's almost impossible, but for us, that's our mission. We want to put ourselves out of business because we're tired of seeing young folks, lose their lives or even becoming impaired. We don't even talk about how many disabilities we're seeing as a result of gun violence. We have so many people that we're helping in our program that are permanently disabled as a result of this, right? And our system doesn't have the empathy it needs to. They look at some of the survivors of violence that we're working with as perpetrators. So it's not as much empathy and resources and love by the system, right? They almost look at it like, okay, well, they actually caused their own issue, their own demise, so deal with it. So I think that that's what the approach that we take, from a more holistic, more mental health, trauma informed way. We try to look at them and ask them, like, what do you need and how can we help you get out of this situation, that you're more safer, and we can create more of a safe environment for you. And we've been very successful since we launched in October 2020, not even 3 years ago. We've helped over 250 gun violence victims. That's not even talking about DV victims, victims of stab wounds, or other people that we just help in the community. I would say we've helped over thousands because of all the events that we do through our outreach. But this small team of people that have big caring hearts and that really feel adamantly about stopping violence in our community, we're making an impact, and we're here to stay, because we know that it's not going to be done through policing. It has to be done through these type of initiatives where the community is involved.
Well, thank you for that. And Director Eure, maybe you'll offer me indulgence and patience for just a second. I know that Dr. Chowdhury has a limited time with us here today, so maybe if I could follow up with you, Dr. Chowdhury. You mentioned the Patterson Healing Collective, right, and the impact. Can you explain to everybody, like, what exactly is it, right? How does it work? What does it do? And then, probably more broadly, how has it been, how has it benefited from the state investing in this hospital-based violence prevention, which then, we could then model maybe more broadly. So if you could explain a little of that.
Sure. So if you look at a homicide case, if you look at the national statistics, they say one homicide costs the city $1 million, right? And that's because of the medical bills involved, the overtime for policing, and all that kind of stuff, right? Even when we talk about incarceration, the average, amount we pay it for a person that's incarcerated is about on average 50,000 a year throughout the state, throughout the country. Our program costs $1.5 million a year, and I like to put dollars and cents with it because oftentimes people look at our programs. Oh, you're helping you people, that are gang involved and stuff like that. They try to dehumanize what we're trying to do, and the reality is we're spending money regardless. If people die, if people get hurt, if people are incarcerated, the criminal justice system still costs us money, right? What we're saying is on the front end, let's do the community work and invest dollars into the work we're doing so that we could prevent that violence, so that we could intervene in that violence, so that we could prevent the high cost of medical care, so we could prevent the high cost in this bureaucratic criminal justice system that oftentimes we don't even find the people that have actually done the shooting, right? So if we're talking dollars and cents, it's a much better investment on our ends where we're doing front end work, right? We're helping people get jobs, we're helping people with mental health so that they could heal. We're helping to get to the root causes of violence instead of saying, hey, let's just throw you in a cage, right? And then we'll figure it out later, or we'll just hide you from society. That's not how it works. We're taking a restorative approach where we're saying, okay, people that have once harmed the community, which is our credible, maybe some of the credible messengers we've worked with, right? Not all of them, because a credible messenger doesn't have to be somebody that has, been involved, justice involved. But say those folks that have harmed the community at one point now have changed and transformed their lives, and they're using their stakeholdership in the community to now give back. That's when we talk about restorative justice on a larger scale. That's what we mean, right? We want to make sure that the harm that was done, we bring them back into society, and then now that they can be give back, and they want to, right? They want to help the community. They want to use their influence to do better and influence the young folks that do listen to them because of their credibility in the community. So the way our program works is that as soon as somebody gets shot, we have a 24-hour hotline from the hospital. They call us. We arrive at the bedside. One of our credible messengers or a well-known community activist who knows the community arrives at the bedside of that person that was just shot and asks them key questions like, how can I help you? What do you need? How can we make sure that once you leave here, you're in a safer situation? Do you have medical insurance? Do you have to do a lot of medical follow-ups? How can we make sure that that process of healing is easier for you? Do you have family outside? Let's communicate with your family so that they know that you're okay. Those little things in that moment where a person is fighting between life and death means so much to that person because as you can, we started the program during the pandemic, so you can only imagine how busy the hospital was, right, in 2020. And here comes these caring people when somebody was shot and saying, hey, we're not asking you what happened. We're just saying, what do you need so that this never happens again? Since we've launched, like I said, we've had over 250 gunshot victims that we've helped. 3 have been re-injured, which is pretty a small amount because if you look at the data, people that are when they're first injured, it's about 3 years when they can get re-injured again. So out of the 250, we've had 3 that have been re-injured, and I'm proud of that. And I know that a lot of that, I wish that it was none of them, right? But I know a lot of that has happened because of the work that our team does. Because not only are we meeting them at the hospital and then saying, hey, we're going to follow you in the community, but we're also showing up on their blocks. As soon as somebody gets shot, we'll do an event. Say if there's a mass shooting or a shooting, we'll try to show up the next week and do an event in that block so that the kids that live there, because they heard those shootings, they're not scared to come out their house anymore. We'll set up, game trucks. We'll set up walks. We'll set up, we have these bright orange shirts that we wear, you know what I mean? So that they can get some, familiarity with their community again so they don't have this fear constantly. All those things matter, right? Because we're trying to stop that cycle of violence. Because when you have fear, other people are going to fear, right? And then they're going to try to do things to protect themselves that are not, are not safe, right? So we're trying to say, hey, let's come together as a community, right? And show you different options. We'll walk you, the person that has been victimized, directly through it, but we'll also help your friends. We'll help your family. We'll show up on your community, on your block, so the kids in your community also feel safe. And this is that cycle. A lot of people don't understand that. I always say that all you need is to show a little love, right, and empathy, and you can see miracles happen. But for some reason, it's hard for people to wrap their arms around something so abstract. So that's how our program works. It really is the empathy, the follow up, the case management, the emergency services that we're able to provide. And we're not a program that is like cold, right? When you come in, I always tell my staff, make sure anybody that comes into this office feels welcome, feels appreciated, because there's so many people that's all they need is that validation that somebody cares. And it's something simple like that that can help you build that relationship and build trust.
No, well, thank you for explaining all that, and certainly appreciate that you really drill down to how, even just from a perspective of how it saves our community in dollars and some of these other pieces, because while we know it is about people, oftentimes the naysayers, they have a hard time conceptualizing why we should spend dollars on the front end, know that well, versus on the other end. And it just makes so much sense. So even those who don't believe in the mission as much as certainly, each and every one of you does, is all we do, should be convinced by the fact that this is something in their interest as much as it is all of our interest to make sure that we're helping our fellow citizens. So thank you for sharing that. I appreciate that. Director Eure, maybe to you, a lot there in terms of some of the work that's going on. Can you explain a little bit maybe of your experiences, what you're seeing in Newark, and certainly Dr. Chowdhury, noted you and the work you're doing. So maybe you could share a little bit on your end.
So Dr. Chowdhury probably said everything, right? And so she is certainly on the front lines and know the work. So from a place of Newark, I came into the work by way of Newark Anti-Violence Coalition. And that was more of a community organizing and mobilizing kind of an effort that we did in order to bring awareness to crime and violence that was taking place. And this is 15 years ago, 2009. And so before the mayor, Ras Baraka, became the mayor, he was in the streets doing activism and made a call because there was an increase in women and children being shot and killed, and there was no outrage. And so ultimately saying that it's not a law enforcement issue, right? This is a community issue. And so the community needs to be able to solve some of these things and have input. And so the Newark Anti-Violence Coalition formed and would go into every neighborhood where violence took place and create awareness and stop the traffic. And they had demands around wanting to have input into public safety, into the education system, employment, the gang issues that was happening, and ultimately declaring violence a public health issue. And that's how we got to declaring violence a public health issue in the city of Newark once the mayor came into office. But he would come into our rallies every week, and we would introduce him as, this is the people's mayor. We know there's someone down in City Hall, but he don't hear us. He don't meet with us. He don't understand us. But this is the people's mayor right here. And violence being declared a public health issue was one of the first things, that he did. And then I began to work in the health department on the city side and begin to build out violence prevention work. And then now in 2020, we have violence declared a public health issue. We have the Office of Violence Prevention being signed into executive order, and to be able to reallocate 5% of the police department's budget to be able to do that, which is a big deal for so many cities because everyone is looking to figure out how do we fund this violence prevention work. And so public safety, again, can't do the work alone. And so it was a no-brainer, in my opinion, that, we fund a community-based public safety side. And so I come to this work by way of activism, by way of social work. I'm a licensed clinical social worker, but also by having personal experiences. My brother was shot by the police. My brother was shot by someone in the community. My cousin was shot and killed in the city of Newark. I have friends that were shot. And so I couldn't just sit by and say, because the rallies wasn't enough, but the awareness. And I said, I need to do something about this. We need to do something about this. And that's the way I come into the work. And the passion around the work is a huge commitment, because there's an obligation to be able to have the city of Newark, our leadership, Mayor Baraka, our public safety director, our community-based public safety organizations, our community-based organizations working together. And so that's ultimately the mission and the goal that we're doing, to have city government, law enforcement, public health, the health department at the helm, and also our community-based organizations working together. And that's the secret sauce that I would say that some cities are missing, is that coordination and collaboration, and having it said by our city leadership that this has to work. There's no other option. We all have to win. And the attitude around that, we all have to combat the violence in our community, domestic violence, sexual violence, and gun violence. And so that's ultimately what the Office of Violence Prevention and Trauma Recovery does, with social workers, outreach workers, community-based folks, all working together to be able to combat violence in our cities.
No, thank you for sharing that, and to hear, that partnership of how things have to work together, right, for success. I mean, that speaks volumes, and certainly, so sorry to hear, your journey into this work too, and the impact of gun violence that you've experienced and the trauma, I'm sure. But to be able to do something about it is the ultimate, right? That's the ultimate give back, to be able to try and make a difference. So we appreciate your work there. Jasmine, maybe I'll go to you next, and your work with Moms Demand Action. It's a broad look, right? We're talking a little before, maybe specifically to a community and the community work going on. Whether we're talking in Patterson, we're talking in Newark. You're with an organization that is in a lot of places, I guess you'll say, and doing broad work. How have you seen the organization, I guess, impact gun violence? How have you seen it help in reduction or awareness, or all the pieces you'd speak to? Tell us a little bit about the activity and actions around Moms Demand Action.
Sure. Well, since I've been involved, I think the landscape has both changed for the better and also changed for the worse. I would say we've continued to see high profile mass shootings. We've continued to see lots of gun violence in our cities in New Jersey and across the country. And at the same time, I think one of the things that is changing is the organization Moms Demand Action has grown to millions of volunteers across the country and supporters. And I believe that we've been successful in changing some of the language around the way people talk about gun violence. Some of the things that we talk about are gun safety, common sense gun laws. These things have become a little bit more vernacular since the time when I initially got involved. And I'm always proud to see that when people are starting to get their heads around the fact that this is a public health crisis. It's affecting all of us. It affects you wherever you go, wherever you live. There's no one who's safe from this epidemic. And there are a lot more things we could do, a lot more practical things we could do, both at the lawmaking level, but also at the community violence intervention level. And so one of the things I'm proud to say is that Moms Demand Action is actively looking to partner with and support the work of community organizations like the Patterson Healing Collective, the Newark Community Street Team, and I live close to Trenton, the Trenton Community Street Team, because we know that those programs work. And when you really look at the things we could practically do to reduce harm, and where and how we can invest in those things, it's not rocket science. It's straightforward, that there are things we could be doing a lot more of to curb this epidemic. And I think one of the main strengths of Moms Demand Action is that the organization having such a broad reach and having such a volunteer base has the ability to mobilize a lot of people at short notice to support or to withdraw our support, express our non-support for different laws, depending on what the law is that may be being made in one state or another. I always count myself lucky to live in New Jersey, where we do have strong gun laws, but I also think that it shouldn't go ignored that a lot of our communities suffer from gun violence in spite of those laws. And so what's wrong with this picture? How do we make sure that the state and all of our communities and cities are investing in the kinds of programs that really do work and help keep our citizens safer?
So let me ask you to kind of pick up there. You noted it, right? I think we'd all agree, under the Murphy administration, there's been a lot of bills signed into law. New Jersey has some pretty strong gun safety legislation as far as states go, right? We'd have to all, I think, note that it must be having some impact here, and we see the reason why we fare better than many other states when it comes to some of the statistics around gun violence. If you were to pinpoint, what has been most impactful, like what's the thing Jersey has done best? I guess you noted the laws there, so I'd start with you and say what laws specifically has Jersey done that has been really impactful, and maybe what's the next best thing what's the next thing New Jersey could do that could help?
Well, I think that one of the best laws New Jersey has is the extreme risk protection order. So one of the sides of gun violence that doesn't get talked about enough is suicide. And so how does the extreme risk protection order help with that? Basically, that law allows a person to report that someone they know is in crisis, maybe having a mental health crisis, maybe they are at risk of harming themselves or someone else, and even then their gun can be removed by law enforcement. And so there's what I want to say, the requirements of the law. You have to have justifiable reason why you think this is the case, and then there's a procedure you follow to implement that. But that can help someone who's in crisis from having their crisis become a fatal crisis, either to themselves or someone else. So I think that's and that's something that I think we need at the federal level. Certain states have it, certain states do not. The states that do not have a law like that in place have a much higher rate of gun suicide, and it's a no-brainer. People go through crises in their life, and if a gun is handy, they're much more likely to succeed at completing suicide. So that's one thing I would say. And then as far as the next thing, I think that we could do more at the state level in investing in programs like the Patterson Healing Collective and other community violence intervention programs. There is actually a lobby day coming up in Trenton this week where folks will be talking about the need for investment into these programs. Moms Demand Action will be there supporting our partners and raising our voices to say this is investment we need. I think that what's the role of government, even with strong gun laws, is now let's see where they aren't working. Like, where is gun violence still prevalent, and how do we really provide that healing in those communities, and the things that make a community safer. It isn't one size fits all solution. Gun violence takes many forms and has many solutions, and the common thing in them is the gun, but there's a lot of differences into how it plays out in different communities.
Yeah, no question, and certainly, even in Jersey, just seeing some of the different pieces that the Attorney General has been advocating, and some of the challenges that then happen. Right, we're seeing, especially with the United States Supreme Court and some of the pieces there, some of the laws that we have here in New Jersey that I think we would credit with some reduction compared to other states are being pushed back on or attacked, and certainly even some of the new laws they're putting forward questioned, and certainly they always try to find the next thing to kind of help keep residents safe. But absolutely appreciate that it's a broad issue, and then it's a local issue, right? Both are at play when we're trying to talk about safety here. Jai, I might go to you and say, we just heard Jasmine's talking about this rally in Trenton. There's stuff going on. You've been part of a movement, and certainly making sure raising awareness and getting people out. Often I'll say this, we've seen that youth have been on the forefront of kind of leading this conversation or being in this space. Here in New Jersey, when we see a lot of the, mass school shootings that we've seen in other states, we know where we stand there. And certainly though we know that there's always that possibility, always that fear, because there are weapons, right? There are, things that could happen. I guess what do you see that can be done? Yes, there's the rallies at the state houses and our state house. There's the laws we could pass. What else do you see that can be done? As we talk to our youth, as our youth lead in this movement, what are some of the things that we can do?
Honestly, this is such a multifaceted issue, and I think folks like Dr. Eure and Jasmine and Moms Demand Action, I think it's very important to understand how multifaceted this is, right? You can get a professional from so many different fields, sit them down, and we can talk about gun violence, right? We can approach it from a youth point of view, a social work point of view, a public health, public safety. So what I think is important in going forward and educating our youth and educating a lot of folks, right? It has to come to the point where gun violence is not the root problem. It is like kind of like, the symptom. Rather, I think I said that wrong, but you guys know what I'm trying to say. Like, it is not the problem. The problem is so many different things, right? There's a lack of investment in the community, right? And gun violence is definitely a symptom of that. There is food insecurity, poverty, right? We're just coming off of a global pandemic, which a lot of folks are, convinced can't happen again. But this is a pandemic in itself, right? Gun violence in the United States. Governor Murphy, there's been such an investment in the community, legislatively, community-wise. um, in terms of tackling these new and kind of improved ways that bad actors can use weapons in New Jersey, right? 3D guns is a huge thing. Um, it's ridiculous because a 3D printer is $150, and then like the ABS filament for the 3D printer to print this gun, one spool is like $20. So for under $200, you can make your own weapon, right? So that education is very important going forward, and so people can understand like, hey, this is not just an issue of the past, right? This is no longer folks going into schools and, bullying. You can't blame it on all these different things anymore. This is really definitely a problem in the United States. And in New Jersey, we're fortunate, like you said, we have some of the strongest gun laws in the country and some of the lowest rates of gun violence. Like, it's almost like those two are connected, right? Hopefully other states around us can get with the program. And there are 10 states, right, where most of the weapons that are smuggled across the United States, there are 10 states, and Virginia is on there, right? And Virginia's right there, right? Pennsylvania was on there. The iron pipeline is a thing as well. So I think it's such a multifaceted issue, and the sooner we look at it as such, the easier we'll be going forward, because we can, as much as we can do, the best way to combat in my opinion, the best way to combat a public health crisis like this is through education, and is through making sure the experts and the community members who know what they're talking about are at the forefront of tackling this issue. Because a lot of times, like we've seen, folks who are closest to this quote unquote problem are also closest to the solution.
Yeah, that's a great way to say it. Director Eure, I'll go to you. We've heard and talking a little bit about some of the legislation at the state level and how that interfaces, and certainly you could speak to how that impacts things at a local level. You had mentioned, even when you answered before, around they're just not being outraged when gun violence would occur. We're hearing also the youth and the work that they do in trying to keep outrage right at the forefront here of that we should all be outraged. How are you seeing everything kind of come together at that local level with the state laws that are in place? Certainly not really much assistance at the federal level, but some. But the state laws, that activism and energy from outside groups, specifically trying to keep awareness, raise awareness, keep the outrage. And then the work that you're seeing, in that collaboration that you spoke to, how does that all tie together for success in your community and maybe model for others?
It's all interconnected because we need all of it, right? And so while we have, like Jasmine talked about, this day of awareness that we're doing on Thursday, and we're going to the State House, that's taken a lot of work, a collaboration of the New Jersey Violence Intervention Coalition Program Intervention, right, to be able to come together. So coalition work and coalition building is certainly the key in terms of making sure that while we all may do different things in our respective, organizations, we all have the root cause of gun violence at the center of why we all do this work. And so for us, it's taken all of us to come together from different angles: youth violence, because we're seeing a certainly increase in youth violence. But that advocacy piece is important. So we did a conference in Baltimore around some of this, and we talked about organizing and mobilizing is the key. Our messaging is the key. How do we message this work? How do we tell the stories? Because our numbers don't always tell the stories. The data don't always tell the stories, but we have to be in charge of our own narratives and our own messaging around what this means in the lives of people every day. And so when we have people who go business as usual, people who are desensitized, people who are normalizing this, right, where it becomes a part of just the United States culture. Oh, well, this country is built on violence, right? And when we continue to normalize those things, then the fabric of it, right, becomes tainted, if you will, to where it's like, okay, it's just another thing we're fighting against. But so many lives are claimed. So when you don't feel safe going to the grocery store, to church, to the gas station, to any of the places where mass shootings have happened, right? Our babies can't go to school, then that's a problem. And so it touches the lives of everyone. When today I saw a mass shooting in Philadelphia had happened, and a mass shooting. And so mass shootings are becoming a norm. And so it's touching and landing on all of our doorsteps, which becomes all of our issue. And so for us in the city of Newark, our mayor is taking a step and saying we need to sue the gun industries, right? Let's go upstream to where this stuff is happening at, right? Let's make some lawsuits happen. And you may not win. Let's go to the Supreme Court, right? Let's go to, some of these places where we really got to be able to have our voices heard, to be able to put our money where our mouth is, right? To be able to let people know that we're very serious about this and we're not going to allow it to be business as usual. And so our collective voices together with leadership, with city government, with state government, and with federal government, we've tapped into our senators, we've tapped into our state legislators, our assembly people, and we just had an election, and that has to be on the agenda, right? Gun violence, youth violence, all of this stuff that's taking place has to be on the agenda because it affects the lives of all of us, not just one of us.
Yeah, no question. And, certainly a lot of pieces there, as you note, even the one about holding them accountable with lawsuits and liability around this. I know that's a conversation the state attorney general has been having too. And it's just, go after them with the money potentially, go after them with the coalitions, keep raising awareness, note no one is safe because we aren't. And we all got to be together on this. So important note there. Director Eure, maybe and I'll ask all of you maybe as a wrap up to this. We've talked a lot about some of the challenges there, but certainly some of the things that are working, which is really, really helpful. I guess I'd ask you to close in a way that kind of expands our messaging and maybe expands our reach, right? What are you most hopeful for? And what are you saying that somebody who hears this should be doing or can do to kind of help move this forward? And I'll ask everyone the same question. So, what gives you some hope right now? And what is it that we can do? Someone listening, how can they help?
I would say they can help by getting involved, not getting involved before it lands on your doorstep. We find that once it lands on the doorstep is when people care about it the most, but really get involved before that happens. Us being more proactive around it versus reactive. It's the summer. Our children are getting out of school, and the summer is always an increase in violence in the communities. And so we're trying to get ahead of it, get in front of it, know that you are a part of it and that it's your responsibility. It's not a law enforcement responsibility to make communities safe. More law enforcement does not equal more safety. And so it is more community, it is more community organization, more organizing, mobilizing, and more resources that makes the community safer, not more law enforcement. So I would say write letters. I would say go to your city council meetings and raise the issues. I would say know what's going on a state level, know what's going on federally, and begin to be a part of some of the organizations and some of the work that's happening. So I would just say get involved at any level that you can, even if it's just a summer program, a school-based program, a faith-based program, your mayor's office. Just write a letter or make a phone call to your city council to say, this is important to me.
Thank you. Jasmine, maybe I'll go to you. Same thing.
Sure.
What gives you some hope and what can people do?
Yeah, I can echo everything Director Eure said because it does take all of us to get involved, and there are lots of ways to participate. Staying informed at the local, state, and federal level is essential so that when a certain law or program is up for discussion and decision, that we can make our voices heard. Folks can check out momsdemandaction.org or everytown.org for how to get involved with a local chapter near you or a local group near you. I think the upcoming Advocacy Day on Thursday that we've mentioned is another opportunity, whether you can get there in person or not. Checking that out online, you can see there's an opportunity to write a letter to your assembly person and tell them what you support in terms of budget allocations for 2024. There's going to continue to be small things like that, but they do add up. So I can't echo enough, get involved, and it's affecting us either directly or indirectly, and no one is safe from this epidemic. So the time is now to act. We all need to be finding ways to add our voices to the chorus of voices asking for more action on this topic.
Well, there it is. I mean, as you said, hey, it might be small steps to get started, but to your point, maybe a small step becomes part of a bigger step and part of broader action by somebody getting involved. Jai, same thing to you.
Absolutely. I started doing this work when I was a senior in high school, and now I've graduated college. And over the last 5, 6 years, there have been so many wins, right? We can't lose that hope, because the minute you lose hope, the minute you can have those bad days, and you need to process. And I think Jasmine, Director Eure, really hit on the head what you can do to get involved. But what I will say to our listeners is what you can do to take care of yourself when you do this work. Self care is very important, right? Because if you burn out, you are no good to anybody, any cause, no matter what it is, if you're not good to yourself. So I think self care is very important. Take that walk, journal, spend that time with your loved ones. This work, you can walk away from it for a little while, and unfortunately we're still going to be working, but that's the thing. There are people in so many different organizations and facets of this issue, and we're all doing it together. So make sure you always take care of yourself, and don't lose hope, right? It gets sad seeing the news, being in this 24-hour news cycle, right? Seeing all these different things of what's going on in the United States, and the access to all the information via, social media apps, right? How graphic it's becoming when we see certain things on the news and on social media apps. But we've made such progress here in New Jersey, and even nationally in the states around us, and we just have to keep going, right? And I'm hopeful that hopefully the future generations of American children will never have to worry about gun violence, or know what the sound of a gunshot sounds like.
Well, let's all hope that, and certainly with your efforts and everyone's efforts on here, I know everyone's doing their part to make that a reality. So, I just hope that anyone listening, it's take those steps, join, be part of the coalition, the work that everyone's doing together, play a role in leaving this a little bit better place for those who come after. So I just want to thank all of you. Really appreciate the conversation, powerful, impactful, and hopefully moving for those who hear it to action. And we can help make a difference around this issue. So thank you so much for all being on. Appreciate it.